Hello, everybody. Good to see you all. I'm glad everyone stayed for this afternoon to hear this. This is my friend Kate Lincoln-Goldfinch, and she is a power force. The yellow is just a signal of the light that she shines on our community. Kate is an immigration attorney, been practicing about 20 years, I think, right? And has been a leader in our community in so many different ways, but especially in immigration. And so I have asked her here to come talk to us and educate us on what we can be doing, what we need to know, and how we can be a positive impact in this issue in our community. So without further ado, Kate, and I'm gonna be passing out some things for y'all that Kate's brought for you today. So.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Ooh, hi. Good morning. We have, I wonder, can I use just the hand mic? Is that? Oh, it's just the earring. Okay. I'm not used to like the rock star equipment. I'm used to just the basic. How's this? Okay, there we go. Okay, so we have about an hour, which is plenty of time to have a conversation and a discussion, and I'm open to all of that throughout our talk. I'm going to be talking about immigration and what's happening a little bit, the importance of immigration, and what I have been sharing with people in terms of know your rights information and what immigrants need to know to protect themselves. But I'm available for policy discussions, debates, just general thoughts and questions, specific case questions. All of that is on the table. I don't know how we'll do she'll move it. Okay, so my name's Kate Lincoln-Goldfinch, and as Amy mentioned, I've been doing this for about 20 years. So 20 years ago, I was at the UT Law School, and I knew I wanted to do public interest work of some sort. And I speak Spanish, and so as a law student, I signed up for the immigration clinic because everybody said it was a good one, and I thought I would be able to use my Spanish. And my first assignment was to go to a detention center in Taylor to do an intake with a family there. I wonder, can I switch to the hand mic? This is just making me a little crazy. Thank you. I'll be a rock star in my next life. Thank you. So I was sent to this detention center to do an intake with a family of asylum seekers, and they were from Iraq, and it was a mom and a dad and a little 5-month-old baby girl. And while I was meeting with them, the mom handed me her baby, and she said, "Will you hold her? You smell like outside." And I was holding her baby and talking to them and hearing their story. And at the end of that meeting, she asked me if I would sneak her baby out with me, take her baby, and take care of her until they could get out of this detention center. And needless to say, I did not take her baby with me, but I was, as a student attorney, assigned to represent that family in their asylum proceedings. And I was able to win that case and pick them up, and the rest is history. But that moment for me in that detention center was the moment my life changed, because I grew up in Austin, actually right around the corner, progressive parents. I just, believed what was written on the Statue of Liberty. People weren't talking about immigration then like they are now. So I just really felt like this is a welcoming nation, and that's who we are. And that moment was when I realized the reality of the way we were actually treating immigrants. This was during George Bush. This was around 2005, and it was the first time we had started detaining immigrant families. And so for a couple of years, I worked with families in detention who were seeking asylum. And then I've been in private practice now, since the end of that fellowship, doing immigration law in Texas. And so a lot of my clients, it's just green card and citizenship cases and things like that. But I've been around through a lot of the iterations and several presidential administrations now to see the policies on the front line here in Texas. So, family separations during the summer of 2018 in that same detention center went during the first Trump administration. they were attempting to send a message to asylum seekers not to come. And so they started taking kids away from their parents at the border. I'm sure everybody heard about that. It was the summer of 2018, and in the beginning of that summer, they were just taking the children out of their parents' arms, just in the detention centers, like physically ripping them. I can't even talk about it without getting emotional, but as a parent, it's so hard to see that. And then through that summer, it was such an event to, thank you, Amy, to go through that, like the screaming and the crying, that they started to trick the parents into letting their children out of their sights. So they would say things like, I need to take your child in the other room for a photo, or we're taking you to court to process you. And then the next thing that these parents knew, their children would not be returned to them. So that was just one of the many policies that occurred during that first administration, which was focused on the border. The main aim during that first 4 years was to close down the border and close down asylum seekers. And they learned a lot. I say that Stephen Miller is actually brilliant. He's evil, but very, very smart and understands the immigration system, and they were successful in closing down the border the first round. And so this round, what they've done is they hit the reset button almost on day one of office, and now they're focusing on interior enforcement and what else they can do. So they're pushing beyond, and we'll talk through some of that. Before we get into what's happening, I want to just show you guys this first slide is just pictures of my clients. We do, as I said, we do asylum, we do humanitarian cases, green card citizenship, everybody who comes to our office and gets their work permit for the first time or their green card. If they want to take a picture, they do. We have 4,000 of these photos lining the walls in the offices of our office, and sometimes I just stare at their faces. They're so incredible and impressive and admirable to me. These are my clients, and let's talk about immigration for just a moment in the country. In the United States, we have an aging population here in the U.S., and we have more people over the age of 75 than under the age of 15. And that's the first time that has occurred. And in the last census that occurred, for the first time since the census has been done, which was the middle of the 1800s, immigrants accounted for our population growth in the United States because we are aging and having babies at a lower rate. And it is immigrants that are going to allow us to continue the workforce in the United States. Next slide, please. So here's some more statistics about, I think my guess is, I don't know you all, my guess is that you're all here because you are moved by the humanitarian angle of this topic. But I do often talk about the economics of it and the numbers for people who are, just curious or on the fence or unmoved by the humanitarian angle. So here's some statistics for you. 1 in 3 home health aides in the United States is an immigrant, and that's really relevant as our baby boomers are aging. This is going to impact our Social Security or Medicare and other programs. The number of people over the age of 85 is expected to double by 2035, and it will triple by 2060. The Social Security Administration estimates that undocumented immigrants contribute $13 billion in payroll taxes, but they only receive about $1 billion in benefits. So 12 billion into the system. And so you might have seen in the news this week, Elon Musk in one of his, presentations about the fraud and the abuse they were finding, this was all over Fox News, they stood up in front of this chart, this graph that showed an increase in the non-citizens who were receiving Social Security numbers. Did anybody see that? And it looked like this, this bar graph, and it just this number of non-citizens who are receiving Social Security numbers as if there's this rampant fraud and immigrants taking benefits. But actually, non-citizen means anybody who's not a citizen. So it's all the people who have work permits and all the people who have green cards and all the people who have, employment visas, and they're working and they're paying into the system. And so it's actually great news for us that these numbers are growing, that these non-citizens are getting into the Social Security system. They're not actually taking benefits out. They're paying money into the system. And the next slide, that's U.S. Here are some statistics for you on the next slide, just in Texas alone. So it really matters here in our state, where 1 in 5 of our nurses are immigrants, and 1 in 3 of our STEM workers, our entrepreneurs, are immigrants. So it's really impactful on our economy of the state and, of course, in the country if we don't have enough immigrants here to work. So let me just, okay, now we're going to talk about, we're going to go down a couple of slides. Here we go. So this slide and then the next one, you can't read this obviously, so we don't have to stay here. We can just go to the next slide. This is the list up through the 66th day of office of the policy changes that have occurred under the Trump administration. So there were 209 on this list, and that was a couple of weeks ago. So they're tracking about 3 policy changes per day. And I sort of put these in a few buckets of ending legal immigration policies, impacting the court system, impacting the border, and impacting interior enforcement. I'm just going to walk through some of them. A lot of these you've heard about on the news, some of them you may not have. So the birthright citizenship, that was one of the first things that Trump announced through executive order, was an attempt to cancel birthright citizenship, which is part of the 14th Amendment of our Constitution, and that has been blocked by the federal courts. Trump has appealed all the way to the Supreme Court, and we're waiting to hear if the Supreme Court is going to grant cert on that. They probably won't. We probably won't see birthright citizenship going anywhere. We have temporary protected status for Venezuelans was canceled, so Biden extended temporary protected status. Trump canceled it. The good news, there's rare good news these days, but good news is a lawsuit was filed and a federal judge in California issued an injunction on that cancellation. So actually tomorrow, hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans were set to lose their status. And I've been talking to a lot of employers, and Venezuelans, of course, who are losing their jobs as this comes up. But now that injunction went into place and their status is not being revoked. Of course, that's going to be appealed, and we'll see what happens, but that's a small good news item. I will say at this point, we're in the a few months in, which has given enough time for them to roll out a bunch of executive orders and for lawsuits to be filed and for federal courts to issue injunctions or pauses. And so, as I'm sure you're all aware, we're at this moment where we're watching to see not only are the federal courts going to keep issuing these injunctions, but is the administration going to follow these court orders, or does our system of checks and balances dissolve at this point if they don't follow these court orders? Another thing they've done under canceling legal programs, and I think it's relevant to talk about the canceling legal programs, because oftentimes conservatives or people I will talk to will say, well, I'm all for legal immigration. But I don't think that that's true when you get into it, because they cancel legal immigration programs. I mean, this is what legal immigration is. So for example, the CHNV program is a Cuban, Haitian, Nicaraguan, Venezuelan parole program that allowed hundreds of thousands of people from those nations to apply for entry and get admitted legally. And they had to have a sponsor in the United States to come here, and they have work permission. And the Trump administration canceled that program. And of course, they're going after a lot of the Venezuelans. We've heard about the plane that got sent to El Salvador. This one I can't really figure out why, but Venezuelans in particular are under attack by the Trump administration. I do think racism is at play, of course, but and maybe some political stuff, but it's kind of an odd one for me to figure out. If anybody has thoughts, love to hear them. They're slashing humanitarian parole, and then they've stopped work on all refugee resettlement in the United States. And refugees are people who get legal status abroad. They go through this very long and involved process. They're staying at a camp, a UN camp. They go through multi-interviews, and they come to the United States with protected status. And the support of refugees has been revoked by the Trump administration. Within the court system, they have discouraged pro bono representation in the courts. They've canceled the support, including Friends of the Court for Unaccompanied Migrant Kids. These are the little children who are going to court alone, and they no longer have the support of the nonprofits who have been providing representation to these children. It's really devastating. All of this money for these agencies just got yanked, and Raíces, for example, is one of the biggest providers of services in Central Texas, and they just last week laid off over 100 people, I think, a lot of people, and these kids just don't have lawyers anymore. They've issued a new practice manual in the court that makes it harder to practice, and then they've authorized ICE enforcement at the immigration court so that when people are going to their hearings, they can now be picked up by ICE. Along the border, this was the reset button that I mentioned. They, declared a national emergency at the border, started sending troops. So we've sent thousands and thousands of active duty military now, and they're continuing to send waves of military down to the border, even though it's very quiet down there. I'm actually wanting to go and find out where they are and see if I can peek at, I don't know what they're doing. I mean, I don't think that there is a lot for them to do, but it's thousands and thousands of troops that are being sent down. Let's see. They've stopped work on the LOP programs for kids and families who are detained. On day one, they ended the CBP One app. This was an app that was developed to allow asylum seekers to apply for entrance. So people who are going through the process, you have to submit your photo and go through a background check to even come to an interview at the border. And I can tell you, during the Biden administration, when I went down to the border and I would talk to people who were, at the shelters on the other side, it was all about the app. They were all trying to go through the app, and then the app couldn't read their photo. And it was like, those were all the questions that I were getting. These are people who are desperate. They've fled their homeland for whatever reason, and they're trying to do it the right way. And when they canceled the app on the first day in office, tens of thousands of people who had been waiting for months and months just had their appointments canceled. They've reinstated NPP, and then, of course, the airport detentions that we've heard about. That's not southern border. That is essentially at each of the borders. Customs and Border Protection has authority at the borders to do a whole heck of a lot. One might think that citizens don't have rights in these airports the way that they're behaving, but we do. Citizens do have rights not to have our items searched, and we can't be detained if we don't have criminal charges. But permanent residents, as we've seen in some of these cases, can be interrogated and they can be detained if they're deportable, and that is occurring at the airport. So a lot of green card holders are really scared right now about traveling, as they should be, but I think that the advice I'm giving people is if you haven't ever been arrested, you're not leaving, or you haven't left the country for more than 6 months, and you haven't engaged in any pro-Palestine protests, you ought to be okay coming back in at the airport. But I'm also hearing a lot of people are noticing that their LinkedIn profiles have been searched by the government, because you can't tell on Facebook and other social media, but you can see it on LinkedIn. And so that's something that's curious that's going on. And then, of course, a lot of the student protesters are just being denied entry. Green card holders and citizens cannot be denied entry at the airport. They have to be allowed in. But green card holders can be detained if they have, charges or they're being found as deportable. So, but people who are just on a visa, they can be rejected at the border. Did you have a question? Oh, okay. Yeah, you can see who's viewed your profile online. It'll say someone from the Department of State or someone from USCIS. It doesn't tell you who, but you can see that it's someone from an immigration agency that has viewed. I've heard of like 5 of these anecdotally. So, I mean, probably everything. I think when they're investigating someone, they're looking at all of their social media. I mean, we know that they're looking at social media. They're adding it as a question on the immigration forms to look at the handles. So I think it could potentially be an indication that they're checking this person out online. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What do you want to share a little bit about what they were asking you? It's okay if you don't want to talk about that. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Great. Right. And they don't understand any of that. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that with us. Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, the Venezuela thing, I can't really wrap my head around. I mean, what seems obvious is that we have more people from Venezuela coming. And so if the point is to scare people, then when by the Trump administration, to scare folks into thinking that we are under an invasion, then it's an easy population to choose because there are a lot more Venezuelans coming, for obvious reasons. And then they claim that people are members of the Tren de Aragua gang, but then, all the families are speaking out and sort of debunking all of that. So my suspicion is that they're just choosing Venezuela as a population because it gets people riled up and scared. But I think, I was talking to a Venezuelan journalist recently who was planning on staying outside of the country for a conference, and I said, I think you should get back because the new travel ban is expected to be announced any minute, and it's looking like Cuba and Venezuela are going to be on the red list, and they never have before. So that tracks with what I'm hearing from other people as well. And then, of course, there's interior enforcement, and I'll talk about this in the rights part of the presentation, where they're expanding expedited removal. This is one of the biggest things in the interior that I think people need to know. This is the ability of DHS to deport someone immediately without any due process rights, and that's if they've been in the country for less than 2 years. It's never been applied to the full extent of the law, but it was a law that was passed in '96, and so Trump was able to just expand it by executive order. That's one of the reasons that one's not going to get blocked in federal court. And so what it means is DHS can just pick up anybody off the street, and if they can't prove they've been here for longer than 2 years, they can just get removed within hours. So that expedited removal is going to be really critical. You've probably heard about this, rescinded the Safe Places memo, which means that churches, hospitals, schools, and domestic violence shelters are no longer secure locations. So ICE enforcement actions can occur in places like that. Now, ICE leadership has said they're not going to conduct raids in sensitive locations, but I've heard from people who have, seen ICE in the schools. I talked to the head of a domestic violence shelter that had law enforcement hanging out outside of their offices right after this memo was revoked. So they're saying one thing and we're seeing something else. They've issued an executive memo against immigration lawyers and other law firms saying that we just commit fraud and abuse and they need to seek disciplinary action against us. Yes, a question. So I would have said no. So a few weeks ago, I went to this meeting with the head of the local, the Central Texas ICE office, and he said, no, we're not going to go into any schools unless someone is a fugitive and they're violent and they're not coming out of the school. So that's what I was sort of going around and telling people, and then I did a community presentation, and a woman raised her hand and said her daughter is a high schooler in Bastrop, which tends to be pretty anti-immigrant. And she said ICE was on campus and asking a bunch of the kids about their parents' status. And so this woman was undocumented, and her daughter was being questioned about her. And I've heard of a couple of other, things on social media and all of that. So I can't really tell what's happening in terms of schools, but I think it's on the table, which is one of the reasons that know your rights stuff is so important, because the cops and law enforcement can talk to a minor. They can talk to anybody, anytime, anywhere they want, really. So it's up to the people to know that they don't have to answer any questions, including the children, believe it or not. So the kids, one of the things I tell people is that the kids really need to know everything that's going on. They need to know the plan. They need to know to remain silent. And I'll get into that stuff, the sort of useful, what can we do stuff here in a moment. I'm almost done with the updates, but for obvious reasons, it takes a while. And then the last things I'm sure you guys have heard about, and these are sort of what these pictures are about. On the left are these student protesters who have been caught up. So Mahmoud Khalil is the top middle. He's the one we've all heard about. He's a green card holder who led the student protests in Colombia, the pro-Palestine protests. He was detained, and they're all being taken to Louisiana, which is an interesting choice, but it's forum shopping, because Louisiana, the federal district court there, is really slow and not inclined to release people, and then cases get appealed to the Fifth Circuit, which is also over Texas. Super conservative, very anti-immigrant. So they're scooping these people up in these more liberal jurisdictions and putting them in Louisiana. And so he's actually still detained. They initially charged him as deportable for this, if the Secretary of State has reason to believe that this person's activities could have adverse foreign policy consequences for the country, then he could be charged as deportable. It's pretty flimsy. And so they brought some additional charges where they said he didn't, on his green card application, give the full length of time that he was involved with this UN Palestine refugee support group. And so they're saying that he committed fraud on his green card application. But he's still detained in Louisiana. And then a lot of these other, I'm going to mispronounce their names, but the woman at Brown University, there was a viral video where she was just walking out of her house and these plainclothes officers in masks just surrounded her and took her away. She had not engaged in any protests. She was a doctoral student, a visa holder, but she had co-authored an op-ed to the university. And let's see, there's a couple other permanent residents on here. That's a distinction that is real concerning. Student visa holders shouldn't have their visas revoked just for exercising political speech, of course, but when they're going after the green card holders, which is a lifetime permanent status, then it starts to really get creepy because these people have not been charged with crimes. And so a green card holder can lose their green card if they commit a violent crime, of course, but these people are just exercising free speech. And so these are just some of the protesters, but many, many students have had their visas pulled from them and revoked, and ICE is looking for people. And then this guy, what's his name? Abrego Garcia is his last name. On the bottom right, he's a Salvadoran man who was granted withholding of removal, which is like asylum. Okay, and he went to court, he was granted this protection by the judge, which says we cannot deport him back to his country, he's not safe there. It's a really high bar to win that case. I do those cases. You have lots of testimony, hundreds of pages of evidence. They're hard to win. And he was married, U.S. citizen, kids, got picked up with his daughter in the back seat of the car, and they just accidentally sent him to El Salvador, even though he was granted withholding of removal, which specifically states we will not send him to El Salvador. And he's there. He's in that CCOT prison, which is, El Salvador had rampant gang violence, and then they had this super conservative president come in and really crack down and open up this prison that's just one of the most notorious prisons now globally. And there probably are a lot of gang members from El Salvador in that prison, but in any event, that's where we have sent these Venezuelans, who most of whom are not gang members based on what their family members are sharing. I saw a photo of a guy who had an autism ribbon tattoo with the name of his brother, and they used that tattoo to accuse him of gang membership. And then this guy gets sent back to El Salvador. He's we think he's in the prison. I mean, nobody knows actually if he's alive. And then Levitt, the press secretary, when she was asked about it just a couple of days ago, she said, "Why?" "Oh, because a federal judge ordered us to bring him back." And she said, "Well, I suggest that the judge talks to the president of El Salvador because they have him now." So I think watching really closely, the plane of Venezuelans that was sent there, that case is being appealed, and then this guy's case is ongoing. But I think this is that moment. I mean, if you watch the constitutional scholars, Steve Vladeck does anybody know Steve Vladeck? He's a brilliant constitutional professor. He was at UT Law and then he went to Georgetown, but he has a blog that if you're interested in this stuff, I highly recommend. And he was interviewed on 60 Minutes, and he and all the other scholars are saying, this is our moment when we see what happens with these federal court orders. And the timeline of things is such that that's where we are now. Enough time has passed in the administration that the courts are starting to order the administration to do things. And then those appeals are getting up to the circuit courts and the Supreme Court. And so right now, this moment that we're in is when we start to see if they're going to violate these court orders. So before I move into what I think immigrants need to know and what we can be doing to help them, does anybody have any thoughts or questions on this stuff? Yes? Yes, and I cannot pronounce his name, but he, or I don't remember his title. Does anyone remember his name or his title? He was, the head of the immigration division at the Justice Department, okay? So he was brought into the hearing about this guy's case, and he said, on the stand, I don't think we should have deported him. It was a mistake. And then he got fired. That also happened this week. Yes? Yes. No, we are seeing more domestic travel impacted by immigration stuff. So I've heard of a few cases of TSA agents asking for people's visas. So I used to tell people you're relatively safe if you have a valid passport from your home country to fly domestically. I don't think that's true anymore. I think airports are not safe if people don't have valid legal status in the United States. SIJ it's for kids who have been abandoned, abused, or neglected, and it's a multi-step process where you get a court order from the state court saying it's not in this kid's interest to be returned to their country, but then you use that to apply for SIJ protection with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service, and then you get a green card. So they're safest over here. They're semi-protected right here. They're not protected here. Even when they have the state court order, before they've gotten the approval from CIS, they're not in legal status. SIJS is what you get when you get the approval from immigration. Not really. Not until they get the green card. All right, let's talk about what we can do. There are 3 pieces of advice that I want every immigrant in this country to know about. The first is they all need to consult directly with an immigration lawyer, with a lawyer or an accredited representative at a nonprofit. There are nonprofits that get accreditation from the Department of Justice, and they're not lawyers, but they have a lot of oversight, and those guys are okay too. What happens is immigrants talk amongst each other. I actually talked to a guy a couple of weeks ago who told me that he didn't apply for asylum when he got here because his mechanic and his butcher told him he didn't qualify. He actually said that to me, and he missed his deadline. So they do talk amongst themselves, but they also, many of them don't understand the distinction of a notary public and a notario in a Latin American country. Because in Mexico and Central America, a notario is an elevated lawyer. It's a lawyer plus. They're fancy lawyers. But here, a notary public, as we know, is just somebody who can confirm that a signature on a document is of the person that it says. And you can become a notary by ordering a stamp online. But what happens is people will become notarios, notary publics, and they'll open up a shop and they'll sell people services for filling out immigration forms because they think they know how to do it, and they completely mess up these people's cases. People can end up getting deported, separated from their families. It can be really bad. I serve as a volunteer on the Unlawful Practice of Law Committee for the State Bar of Texas as an investigator, and so not only do I see these cases and the aftermath in my own practice, I see them in my service on this committee, and it can be really bad. And people, they want to save money. They are scared of going to lawyers. Sometimes it's big and scary to go to a lawyer. Sometimes they think that lawyers talk to the government somehow. So if people can just go to a lawyer, talk to them about their case, what we can do in these consultations is help them understand their rights, whether they can qualify for legal status, what they need to do, all of that in a consultation. So that's number one piece of advice. Number two piece of advice is about this expedited removal, which is this 2-year rule. Okay, so this is the law that was passed in '96 that says anybody who's been in the country for less than 2 years can just get picked up off the streets and taken away. And they do rush these deportations. They want these people out within hours before a lawyer can get involved, before the family can get involved. They whisk them away. And so everyone who's been in the country who's undocumented for longer than 2 years needs to be able to prove that on a moment's notice. So what they need to do, this is like when I give these community presentations, I say, go home right now at the end of this presentation and get all your evidence together. It could be anything. It could be the birth certificates of your kids. It could be receipts, rent payments, taxes, check stubs, gym membership. It doesn't matter. Just something that has your name, a date, and a location in the United States, and gather all of that up together in a folder in your house, but take pictures of each thing too. So that if you don't have that folder on you and you get picked up, you can show to the ICE officer that you've been here for longer than 2 years, because unfortunately it's up to their discretion in that moment, and you have to trust that they're going to make the right call. So being able to say, I've got all this evidence on me, is really, really critical for people. One other way to stop expedited removal is if somebody has fear of returning to their country. So that's the other important piece of advice. If someone is an asylum seeker, they do have a fear of returning to their country, to make sure they state that clearly if they're being processed by immigration. Yes? No. No, and I'm going to get, in just a moment, I'm going to get through what you do in each of the places that you're encountering law enforcement, because it can get a little convoluted. Question back here? No, okay. And then the third piece of advice, and this one's tough for people, is to have a family plan, because people don't want to talk to their kids about it. Their kids don't want to talk to them about it. They all know that this is going on, and it's kind of awful. But because ICE could be going into the school and talking to the children, or ICE could be knocking on the door, and the kids need to know not to answer the door. The kids need to know who they can call if mom doesn't come pick them up. They need to know there's a plan, and so I also advise people to do all of the things that we're going to talk about in a minute. Go talk to a lawyer, get all your documents in order, then have a meeting with your kids and say, here's the plan. We've got this all figured out. But I do think that that is an important part of the preparation that families need to do. Question here? Yeah. Great.
Because as someone who's multiracial, like, I'm just gonna be real blunt, like, our white progressive application ain't gonna cut it. Ain't gonna cut it. It's not going to help to approach Latinos, Venezuelans, etc., with the same social emotional disposition that we tend to approach white people, right? It's just a bias. It's just a thing. And the reason that I say it with a little bit of force is because that emotional barriers, those are the barriers you see, not just the legal ones, but the emotional ones that stops that from happening. And so it's a call on people who have that greater privilege who may not ever have that experience in their life. You know, in other words, there's an empathy gap. And that's where we're going to come in. So sorry to interrupt, but needs to be said.
Yeah, I mean, and I think, of course, we all know immigrant families and helping them, like asking what help and support they need. A lot of them, need various things and they are embarrassed to ask for it. And so letting them know we're available, just like being proactive about it, really matters. You had a question? It doesn't. So expedited removal applies to people theoretically who are undocumented only. They're trying to apply it to these CHMV parolees. That's not going to go in the federal courts, but yes. That 2 years thing is for the undocumented people, most of whom have been here for longer than 2 years. Is within the last 2 years, next to impossible to get in the country illegally. Every once in a while somebody slips through, but people, some people might come in on visas and then overstay, but the undocumented population, those millions of people that we talk about, they're people who have been here, most of them for a decade or longer, 2 decades. They've got kids here, they've got a life here, and they've got defenses to deportation. This is a really critical thing, is that somebody who gets picked up who's been here longer than 2 years, most of them have some sort of defense that we can bring forward in immigration court. So we can get them out on bond, we can go before a judge, we can seek cancellation of removal, for example. Somebody who's been here for 10 years, has good moral character, and a U.S. citizen relative who would suffer if they get deported. That's most of them. And those cases end up with a green card at the end of the proceedings. So a lot of times being picked up and put in proceedings is horrible and stressful, but at the end of the day it results in a positive outcome. So it's not the end of the world if someone gets picked up, so long as they don't get expeditedly removed. They have to pause it by protecting themselves. Did I have another question? Okay, let's go to the next slide because this is a QR code. I hope it works on your phone. If not, I can tell you my website. So this is where you can get all of the resources that we've prepared. I have some, like the little handouts that went around in those red cards, and the safety packet for families, which is about a 20-page document. We have it in English and Spanish. Those are the only 2 languages. But it has all the stuff that people need, the Know Your Rights information, the documents. There's a checklist of documents that I think that they should gather and put in this, safe folder in their house. And then it also has the voluntary caregiver authorization. So this is a big thing that people need to do if they're undocumented. They need to fill out this 5-page form for each of the children and pick someone who can come pick up the kids if they get pulled over. I mean, the scariest moments to contemplate are if they're driving and they get pulled over and the cops, want to put their kids in CPS custody, or immigration does. And that's something that they will, here and there, that's something that they will do. So if the parent has this voluntary caregiver authorization, and that person has, I think that person should be a citizen or a permanent resident, and they should live within 15 minutes so that they can just come at a moment's notice, then that could keep those kids out of CPS custody. Next slide. The website, in case that didn't work on your phones, is Abogada Kate, which is attorney in Spanish.com. And this on the left here is that safety planning packet. Okay, I'm moving into the Know Your Rights stuff. Now, so the first thing to know is that everyone's covered under the Constitution. There are Constitution-free zones, like the border and the airports might count as Constitution-free zones, but people who are in the United States, even immigrants, are covered under the constitutional right, particularly the Fifth and the Fourth Amendment, right to remain silent and right against search and seizure. The next slide is just basic rights that people have in this country. So everybody has the right to receive fair payment for their work. This is something that I talk to people a lot about. I do something called a T visa for victims of trafficking. That's anytime someone's worked under force, fraud, or coercion. So that could look like a subcontractor who's not getting paid, a nanny who had her passport taken away to pay back a debt, a restaurant worker who's being harassed by her boss, a house cleaner who's working weekends and not being paid for it. All of that stuff counts as workplace mistreatment, and people who have gone through something like that can actually get legal status if they go forward with the process. This is one of the reasons I say people need a consultation, because that's one of the things we're asking people. Okay, you've been here 20 years. Tell me about the worst job you've ever had. And oftentimes we find that somebody's eligible for a benefit like a trafficking visa, and they don't come in thinking, oh, I was trafficked and I need a T visa. They don't know that stuff. So, but everybody has the right to receive fair payment for their work, and they can bring wage claims. There are criminal cases that can go out against people who don't pay. There's great nonprofits that assist people in these cases, Equal Justice Center and the Workers' Defense Project. Is that right, PDL? Yeah, Workers' Defense Project. They can help people bring claims and complaints for lost wages. Of course, everybody has the right to be free from discrimination. This should show up in schools, registering kids for schools, trying to get apartments. And anytime somebody thinks they've suffered discrimination, gathering evidence is the key. Take photos, save the emails, get as much evidence of what occurred as you can, and then go talk to a lawyer. You don't try to battle the discrimination in the moment, because the person who's doing the discrimination, whether it be a cop or an apartment leasing lady or the clerk at the school, they're not going to all of a sudden be like, oh, you know what, you're right, I am racist. No, you have to just gather everything and then go talk to a lawyer, okay? Everybody has the right to attend public school. Of course, public school, that's a whole other topic, but right now, in the United States, everybody has the right to attend public school, and then, of course, accessing all public safety, calling the police, reporting crime, going to domestic violence shelters, rape crisis shelters, and receiving protective orders. All of that is on the table for undocumented people. Now, let's move to constitutional rights that people have and should exercise, including everybody in this room, not just immigrants. We have the right to remain silent when we are interacting with law enforcement. We should never give law enforcement more information than we are required to give to them. And us, like me as a U.S. citizen, exercising that right, even if I know I'm not in trouble, I'm not going to be in trouble, but if I say, actually, under my rights in the Constitution, I prefer not to talk about that until I have a lawyer present, it helps normalize people exercising their rights. So just practicing behaving that way and interacting respectfully with law enforcement, but enforcing our own rights, starts to just make that the way of the world, the way of the interactions. People have the right not to show their documents. The one time I will say show your documents is when you've been arrested and you're before immigration and they're processing. That's when this expedited removal stuff is going to come up. And then people have the right to refuse a search. The Constitution-free zones are the airports and the border, within 100 miles of the border. So people, of course, can have their luggage searched and their items searched at the border or in the airport. As U.S. citizens or permanent residents, you can decline to give the password for your computer or your phone, but they might confiscate it if you do that. All right, so here's the next slides are what people need to do in their interactions with law enforcement. And again, I think this applies to everybody, not just immigrants. So I think of it as in 3 different places. You're gonna find law enforcement in your house, out there on the street, or in your car, okay? You have the most rights in your home, you have the least amount of rights in your car. And of course, we all know that police can't come in if they don't have a warrant. I think that message has gotten out loud and clear to the immigrant community, which is great. But what ICE does is, right now they're looking for people. They're doing targeted operations and seeking collateral arrests. So we haven't yet seen wide-scale raids. They're not like driving in the Fiesta supermarket and pulling everybody who's coming out of the store, okay? But they are going to places looking for specific people, and they're doing a lot of home arrests right now. So we're seeing a lot of this ICE coming to the home. And they come with what's an administrative warrant. We can look at the next slide. It's hard to tell the difference between an administrative warrant and a judicial warrant. So most people know if they're knocking on the door, you don't answer the door. You say, I'd like to see your warrant through the window or under the door. And you check that this warrant has the name of somebody who's currently living in the house and not somebody who rented a room 3 months ago and they're gone now. That doesn't count. They don't get to come in if they have a warrant for that person. But what they do is they bring something like this warrant on the right, which is an administrative warrant. You'll see it's signed by an agent, an officer of DHS. It doesn't have the name of the court. I know you can't see these very well. It won't have the name of a court. But on the left, you'll see it says the U.S. District Court, and it'll have information and a signature from a judge. That's the difference. And so it's one of the reasons I say people need to have a lawyer and consult with a lawyer is because if ICE comes to the house, they call their lawyer and the lawyer says, show me the document. And we can sort of get in the middle of this. And this has occurred with my clients, I wouldn't say quite a bit, but maybe on a weekly basis. Under this administration, a client will have ICE at the door and we're asking to see the document that they're showing. So this is regular enough that people need to know this information. And then if they have the warrant, they can come in, of course, and then they should only be arresting the person who's on the warrant, and all the other folks should just leave calmly. Okay, and that sort of brings us into the rights on the street. This is the most common place that people are going to encounter immigration. It's going to be they're at their job and somebody's getting detained, like they're in a restaurant and their colleague is getting detained and they're being questioned, or they're walking down the street and they're being questioned. This is anywhere, or they've left their house. ICE is watching them and they've left their house, okay? So anytime law enforcement approaches someone on the street, remember, law enforcement can ask anybody anything they want, anytime, any place, including children. So they will just, and they're trained to lie. They're trained to do whatever they need to do to get people to cooperate. So tell them, hey, I just need you to sign this document or whatever the thing is to get people to comply. So when a police officer or an ICE agent is asking somebody questions, the response to their questions is always a question back. Am I being arrested? And if they say no, you just leave calmly. You don't run, you don't hide. Running and hiding brings up other potential criminal issues. Okay, so that we don't want to hide anyone in our car. That could be harboring. Don't want to run, that could be resisting. So don't do any of those things. But walking away calmly is totally allowed if an arrest is not going down. So if they say, no, I'm not arresting you, okay, respectfully, I'm going to leave now. If they are making an arrest, they're supposed to have probable cause for that arrest. But again, this is not the moment where you would argue with them that they don't have probable cause. You take notes and gather evidence, and then you cooperate. So cooperation is key. There's a viral video going out about this woman, a 52-year-old, I think Salvadoran woman, who they broke the glass of her car window and like pulled her out of the car. And it's really disturbing. Her daughter's the one taking the video, and she's sobbing that they're taking her mom away, and it's heart-wrenching. And as I watch that video, my thought is she should have opened the door. They're telling her, you need to open the door, and she didn't cooperate. So physically cooperating in the moment of an arrest is pretty critical, otherwise it could escalate. But when somebody's being arrested, they only need to give their identity in the state of Texas. You don't have to give any information about your immigration history or what you're doing here or where you're going or how many years you've been in the country. None of that stuff is relevant at the moment of the arrest. Only the identity of the person. The best way to identify is with a U.S. document, like a Texas ID or a driver's license, or you can identify with your name, your address, and your date of birth. But other than that, I don't recommend giving any information in the moment of the arrest, including to the U.S. citizens. That goes for everybody. If they're making an arrest, you're not going to talk yourself out of it in the moment. You got to deal with that after the fact. And then the last place people encounter ICE is, or the police, is on the street, in the car. We have the fewer amount of rights in the car because you have to identify yourself just as a driver. So if somebody gets pulled over and they're being asked to identify, every immigrant should have insurance in their car. They don't need a driver's license to get insurance. And then they should have a document that identifies them from the US, or they can identify with their name, address, and date of birth. I recommend a document. They can get something from the library here in the city of Austin that has their name and can be used as an identity document. And I'm watching the time. So then we can just stay right here. What will happen, this is to the question about when to show the 2 years of evidence. If somebody gets picked up and processed, they're going to be taken to county jail, and then they're going to be picked up by immigration, if immigration isn't the one that made the arrest. And when you're with immigration is the moment that you share the time that you've been in the country for 2 years. You don't get into that stuff with the county or the police, only with immigration when they're making the decision about the deportation. But all of this gets really fuzzy and really hard for people, and so back to my 3 pieces of advice. Number 1 is have a lawyer so that that lawyer can jump right in. I ran the numbers. I had to turn away, I think it was 90 people in February and 160 people in March who had been picked up because I wasn't able in my office to respond. They weren't my clients, and I couldn't drop everything and help them. But the people who are already my clients, I already have their information. I've already talked to them. If they get picked up, we have the capacity to respond. And that's true for most of the immigration lawyers I know. So it's really important that people form those relationships before the emergency occurs. So let me see if I have, the very last slide I think is my contact information. Yeah. I do videos daily on immigration updates. I do a weekly live show on Tuesdays in English and Thursdays in Spanish with all the updates, and I answer questions. If you are interested in keeping up with everything, that's probably the best way to do it. That is my email address. If you have questions or you want to figure out how you can help or get involved, feel free to reach out to me. And do we have a minute for any questions or comments? Anybody have anything? Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn. Tuesdays at 11, Thursdays at noon. And it goes out to all the platforms. You can follow me on any of them and you'll find it. Yeah. It is. Yeah, and there's nonprofits that do low cost or sliding scale. I will say their resources are strapped and they're all losing funding. But American Gateways, that's where I got my start. Raíces, they're the ones that just laid off all those people. Catholic Charities is good. And then there's a couple other smaller nonprofits, in the Central Texas area. If somebody can get into a nonprofit, it's really great. They're good lawyers. Yeah, they have done that. There's just people who shared, supportive pro-Palestine stuff are having their visas revoked. And they're starting to add a question on all the immigration forms asking for social media handles. So I do think immigrants need to be really cautious about social media. Really, anybody who's not a citizen. Yeah. Yeah, I think, I was just who was at the rally yesterday? Were you guys? Yes, it was so good. It's so uplifting, but it was like such a good reminder of the civic duty of speaking up, like showing up, speaking up. If you are a U.S. citizen, talk about it on social media, doing the legislative calls. They actually mark tallies for the calls that they're getting. And there's an org called 5calls.org, the number 5, and you can go to their website and just put in your info. It does your location search for you, and there's a whole list of all the issues. You click on the issue that matters to you. It gives you the phone number of your legislators and a script to read. And so you can just click the number, read the script, and then you're done. It's so fast and easy, and it actually matters. I mean, Sarah Eckhart, she's a senator, spoke yesterday. Vicki Goodwin, representative, spoke, and they're all sharing that this stuff actually makes a difference in their offices. So really doing the stuff that we know is our civic duty, as much as I think it gets a little exhausting hearing that that's the advice, but that, the organizations, there's a slide for Vicina, if you guys are interested in volunteering or donating. This is an organization I founded after the family separations. We train lawyers to take pro bono cases for immigrants, and we respond to the various immigrant crises that go on. So, and we're losing 2/3 of our funding right now. So organizations that do that work need a lot of support right now. Yeah. Justice for Our Neighbors is great too. They do a lot of the SIJ kids cases. Another good org, yeah. I didn't know that they added a specific asylum fee. Was it during the fee hike? And it was supposed to go to the asylum cases? Oh, that's interesting. No, I didn't hear about that. But of course, that's the kind of thing that could change on a presidential whim, so where they allocate those fees. Wow. Yeah, I will look into that. I don't know what they did with that money. That's interesting. I definitely get harassed, but not in person yet, just online. But it's just part of the deal. Yeah. No, I don't think so. Naturalized citizens, to me, feel pretty safe unless they know they had fraud. So they did announce a denaturalization unit where they're investigating fraud, but I think that's meant to be more chilling than anything. We haven't heard of any cases where they're actually revoking naturalizations for people. Well, I think what they're saying when they say fraud, right? Yeah, or Melania. Yeah. Right. So there kind of is one for green card holders. They can't really go more than 5 years back without it increasing the work involved with revoking status. And so I don't know if there's a statute on the denaturalization. I don't think, I mean, I guess theoretically there isn't one, but again, I think it's really not an actual threat, really rare and unlikely that they're going to go after citizens. And you'd be able to just fight that in federal court. Yeah. Oh, yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all. They're doing that sort of scrutiny on all of the applications, all the types, and this is going to the attacking legal immigration. They say they are for legal immigration, and yet they're cracking down on all the people who are applying the legal way. You know, we see that in our family-based cases and our citizenship cases and our VAWA cases, and we're getting these ridiculous requests for evidence that just make our job so much harder, and it's like they're not warranted at all. So it's just I think what happens is that the people who are enforcement-minded / anti-immigrant who work within these agencies are totally empowered in times like these, and they just sort of run unchecked, including the agents at the border. And in fact, that ICE officer that I met with, he said that. Somebody asked him, what's the difference for you all between Biden and Trump 2.0? And he said, now we can do whatever we want. They used to have to run things up the flagpole, and now they just do whatever they want. And I think that's true, you know, to the business employment officer who reviews petitions who thinks immigrants are liars, and they can just kick back as many cases now as they want, and nobody's telling them not to do that anymore.
So giving financially to these nonprofits is probably one of the best ways to help right now?
Definitely. They are so, it's so sad. And I see that as an employer. I'm getting applications from people who have been laid off from these, including immigration judges who just got fired. I mean, but yeah, it's really bad. I mean, I know the whole economy is a mess, but also immigration nonprofit is just total dumpster fire right now. Yeah.
I had thought the travel ban would happen before you came to see us. So it was a question I had for like a month that I understand did not happen yet. So we
Right.
But for people who have passports from the countries you expect to see on some level of this travel ban, do you expect that's going to impact their ability to travel to other countries? I'll give you an example. We have a family member who's supposed to attend a wedding in Canada in May. He has a Pakistani passport. He's here legally on a visa. This week is the wedding. Not sure it's going to happen with travel ban. So it's not that he's trying to go back and forth to Pakistan. He's trying to go to Canada and has a visa for it. But like,
I think that was the right move. I wouldn't, it's like that Venezuelan journalist. I was like, get back here before it, because you don't want to be stuck out when that travel ban passes. Yeah.
I really have a passion for these kids with DACA or youth with
Yeah.
DACA. Now, from what I'm understanding from what you're saying, they've been here more than 2 years.
Yes.
So they should be showing their DACA documents should be what they do.
Well, they've all got,
Kids, some of them,
yeah, they've all got Texas state IDs or driver's license. So the best document with the cops is a Texas document that has nothing to do with immigration. I'd rather them not even show their work permit. But if they're before immigration, then they can say, you know, I have a valid work permit and here's my A number.
So best thing is the driver's license, and they'll probably be left alone. If they don't have a driver's license, then if they're transported to ICE, then they get their DACA.
Yeah, I mean, once you're before immigration, you got to discuss your immigration situation. That's on the table. But with the police at the moment of the arrest, off the table. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, I mean, and it's often the kids, but once they open the door and, you know, I mean, I've seen people like talk through the screen and things like that, but once they do the invite essentially inside the house, then they're in. I would not create that ability for them. Yeah. Right. The best way to do it is through the window or slide it under the door. Talk through the door and say, either show me on the window or put it under the door. Not to open the door to get the document. That person doesn't live here. Yeah. One thing, this is sort of unrelated, but a lot of us might end up being witnesses to enforcement actions. And so knowing how to be a good witness is another thing we can do. What's really critical is that we don't interfere with what they're saying, but get your phones out and record the whole thing. It's totally legal to record law enforcement actions in the entire United States. So you don't want to get in their way, you don't want to talk to them, but you want to record, you want to get the plate number, the vehicle description, how many agents there are, what their uniforms say, all of that stuff. Write all of that down, and that's the best way to help, is to be a witness. And obviously sometimes that'll change the way that they behave. But we shouldn't get in the middle of it. All right. Well, you guys know how to find me if you have follow-ups. Thanks so much.